about winning that election. Obviously, we didn't know what was going to happen. So we'll focus on that, and then what you make about Gaza. We know what is happening in Gaza. Even today, A'udhu Billah, dozens of people being killed. And you know, there was a time where Israel would attack a hospital or a school, and there'd be huge uproar around the world. There'd be huge uproar around the world about a school being attacked or a hospital. And now it's a regular occurrence. Every day I open social media, look at the news agencies, and you hear stories about a bombing here at this school in Khan Yunis or Beit Layas or in northern Gaza, in Gaza City, in Rafah. And we're hearing these stories, and you think, where is the world? Where is the world conscience? And so we want to focus on that and how important the Muslim vote was. Nadia Ahmed's a great activist, active in Texas, but also across the United States, about that tussle. Okay, the tussle that we have between Muslim activists, and we had it same here with the Labour Party during the general election here in the UK. There are two opinions. One is we should be at the seat of the table. You've got to be in the party to have influence. That was the viewpoint. There are many people in the Labour Party who I respect, friends insofar, councillors, MPs, who took a decision that for us to be able to influence the direction of the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives, I'm not making a party political point, in this case the Democrats or the Republicans, that you have to be in the party. And you have to have influence. You have to be in those influential positions, and therefore you'll be able to influence from behind the scenes to get a movement in terms of a ceasefire, to stop arms sales, to get politicians to speak more vocally and passionately about Palestine, as they are doing when it comes to Ukraine. The reality is they're not doing that. So that's one opinion. And then there is a second opinion, and there are dozens of councillors here in the UK who resigned from the Labour Party, who resigned from the Conservative Party, who basically said we cannot stay in a political party that either chooses to ignore what is happening in Gaza or excuses the crimes that we've seen. Over 43,000 innocent people have lost their life in Gaza. And in Lebanon, I think we're at close to, I don't even know what the figure is, because we've become so immune to it. We just scroll through our social media. And in Lebanon, every day, people are being killed. Schools have been attacked, as well as hospitals, medical experts, and journalists. And I want to salute the journalists. May Allah elevate all of those journalists who've lost their life, who've become martyrs, and those that are still risking their life every day to bring you and I the story. The least we can do is read the story and show our appreciation for that. So you have those political parties, and you have those two positions. One is to stay in the party and fight for what you believe in and try to influence, and then you have those who think that the party will not change because the party's establishment is going in one direction and they will not change. Therefore, you need to leave the party. And you see some join the Green Party, some will join the Liberal Democrats, some join the Workers' Party, some will join in the independent parties. But the reality is, in the United States, because that's what we're talking about here, in the United States, it's about, do I stay within the Democratic Party and do I try to influence that? And you may remember in the run-up to the Democratic Convention in August, there was a huge movement where there was families of the hostages. Remember the Israeli hostages that were taken on October the 7th? There's over 100 still held in detention in Gaza. And as you know, humanitarians, as journalists, as human beings, we would want to see all hostages released, whether that be in Gaza, which are Israeli hostages, or whether that be Palestinian prisoners who have been locked up in Israeli detention for many, many years, and without the right to a fair trial and without the right to being released. So we're going to be consistent. So that I just want to make that point, and I think it's a very important point. So these hostages that are held in Gaza, and their members of their family were allowed to address the Democratic Convention. This is like every 4 years, the party comes together, it talks about what's on its platform, what's going to be in its manifesto, and then the person who has been nominated to be their presidential candidates accepts the nomination. In this case, it was Kamala Harris. She had accepted the nomination, and sought out the campaign for president. And subhanallah, that, my dear brothers and sisters, so what the Democratic Party would do, and we saw that with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, there's so many cameras in the studio. We are spoiled the amount of cameras we have, but Kamala Harris would then accept a nomination. And during that 4-day convention, it's like a conference, party conference here in the UK, politicians, former presidents would come and make speeches. We saw Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, we had Joe Biden, the current president, making an appearance on the first night. And so you have all these people who tell the story of the candidate. And then on the last day, the candidate tells their story, introduces themselves to the nation and their promises about making America greater, whatever policy issues that there are. And what's been really interesting at this point is that, so the hostages in Gaza, one of their relatives were allowed to address the Democratic Convention. So peak time in the United States to talk about their loved one who's held in captivity by Hamas or any one of the Palestinian resistant groups in Gaza, classed as terrorists according to UK law and United States as a terrorist organization. Others would describe them as whatever, but let's be clear what they are in terms of the UK. They're a terrorist organization. Right, so we're going to take a very quick break, inshallah, but I just wanted to say, now what the Democrats failed to do is, because pro-Palestinian voices within the party said, give a pro-Palestinian voice the opportunity to tell the Democrats and the country at large the impact the war in Gaza and Lebanon is having on ordinary Palestinians. This is a very, very small ask, I would ask. But anyway, we'll...
Assalamu alaikum everyone, I'm Aisha Umar. Flu and COVID-19 spread more easily in winter and can cause you serious illness. But flu and COVID-19 vaccines can make a big difference. They are safe and effective and play an important part in keeping you protected in the winter. So should you run into these viruses, you are likely to have milder symptoms and recover faster, cutting your risk of being hospitalized. Get vaccinated, get winter strong.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising.
If we're not vaccinated,
We're not protected.
and could get seriously ill. Risk of lifelong disabilities.
Are your child's vaccines up to date?
I'm in. Now, you ready for a good day?
He was a scientific hypothesis. She was a clinical study. And the future breakthrough that could cure her is closer than ever. With our research, we can keep saving lives like hers. Donate now to turn science fiction into reality.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. We're on satellite and we're on social media across the social media platforms. We're on social media across the world. So wherever you are watching, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Mohammed Shafiq. Great honor to be here. We're reflecting on this final program on the US elections, because the past few weeks we've been looking at this US election. We looked at the run-up to the election, the actual results, and then last week we kind of reviewed that with some of our guests. We will be going to Texas very, very shortly, talk to Nadia Ahmed about her reflections. But I was just talking about the Democratic Party and their journey, if you like. And one of the things they are, sorry, I'm just going to Sip a glass of water. Alhamdulillah. So one of the things that they did was they invited the family of one of the hostages, Israeli hostages that are held in Gaza, and they allowed them to address the convention one evening. It has millions of viewers around the world, particularly around the United States. Lots of voters would have been watching that. And the pro-Palestinian voices within the party, remember these are the people who said we should stay in a political party, influence from within. They led a campaign to get a pro-Palestinian voice on the stage. The representative is, I forgot the sister's name. Her name is Sister, she's a member of the state legislature. I'm just going to get her name. It was okay. I'm going to find out. I remember a representative, but the Democrats refused. They refused to allow a pro-Palestinian voice to come and tell their story, a Palestinian voice, about their community being eradicated, about their family being affected by the bloodshed and the destruction that we've seen. And there's far too much destruction, and the Democrats turned that down. So what impact does that type of decision making have on American Muslims in many of these states who did not turn out for Kamala Harris, who actively voted for Donald Trump? We'll reflect on that, and then we'll reflect on what can we expect for Donald Trump Mark II. It's 4 years, he's 8 years since he last campaigned for the presidency. He's wiser, he's more aware of his own failures and the mistakes that he made as president. Will term 2 be different to term 1, and what can we expect? We'll reflect on that. Nadia Ahmed is a professor from Orlando in Texas. Assalamu alaikum, Nadia. Okay, so I can't, you can hear me, but I don't think I can hear you, so I'm assuming our viewers can't hear you either. We'll try to get that sorted whilst we're trying to do. I've got the name of it. It was Representative Ruwa Roman. She is she's a member of the Georgia State Representative in the Georgia House of Representatives. So she's an elected person to her office, and you actually saw her. You actually saw her being proposed as that pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab Muslim voice for the Democrats at their convention, and they turned her down, and she wasn't able to make that speech. And they were given a few promises about what was said about a ceasefire needs to happen now, an end to the violence, a release of the hostage, safety and security for the state of Israel, and also more aid to come in from Gaza. And so that's, if you like, the Democrats who alienated the Muslim vote, American Muslims. They were very strongly opposed to what Joe Biden's administration was doing in terms of weapons and giving Israel the right to respond in the way that it chose to do. And we've seen the consequences of that. And I think you have to be able to understand the narrative and the story from the other side, and I think as a journalist, as a broadcaster, I try to do that. And you look at what happened on October the 7th, over 1,200 Israelis were killed. There were dozens, hundreds of hostages taken, and any country would be expected to be able to defend itself and protect its citizens. But at what point does it become more than defending yourself? So if you've got incoming fire, you defend yourself like that. But you look at the death and destruction, as you may or may not know, but I've been to Gaza twice in 2013. So I know it's 11 years ago, but I've been there and I know these communities and I know these people. And they've completely devastated. 43,000 people be killed. So American Muslims were making the same decisions as British Muslims. You remember here in the UK, there was a campaign to support independent candidates, third-party candidates like the Green Party was also an option in the United States, but was an option here as well. And you saw 4 Green MPs being elected, but you also saw 5 independent MPs being elected. Obviously, one of them was Jeremy Corbyn in a constituency where he'd been the MP since 1987, so had been there for many, many years, nearly 40 years as a member of Parliament in that constituency. But there were some surprises in some of those constituencies, predominantly Muslim constituencies, because the population in those areas, the one next door to us here in Wakefield, you think about Dewsbury and Batley. Iqbal Mohammed is the MP there, where he won a 7,000 majority as an independent candidate against the Labour Party. You had Ayub Khan, who beat the sitting Labour MP Khalid Mahmood in Birmingham Perry Bar. You had Adnan Hussein, I declare, is a friend of mine. So we had, I just want to declare that on record because I think it's important to be factual correct. So Adnan Hussein beat Labour in Blackburn, a very close result there. And then we had Shaukat Adam, who is the MP for Leicester West, or Leicester South, I think it was, no, Leicester South. He was the MP he was a candidate who beat the Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth. So you saw a movement here in the UK as well, and because the election was called quite suddenly, they didn't have as much time. You think about some of the other candidates who came very close, Lian Mohammed in Ilford against Wes Streeting. So there were other, you look at Bradford West, Naz Shah, you certainly look at Shabana Mahmood in Birmingham Ladywood. So there was a pattern emerging of Muslim voters who were saying enough is enough. And we're going to not allow any political party to take advantage of our vote or to take our vote for granted. And that's what happened. So you had a significant change here. But actually in the United States, you had something similar. It's on a much larger scale. So we look at the scale that we talk about. You look at, for example, one of the battleground states was Michigan. And one of the largest cities on the outskirts of Detroit is a place called Dearborn. And Dearborn has got the largest concentration of Arabs outside the Middle East. It's a huge community, and I've been there, and it's got a beautiful mosque. It's very vibrant. You know, you don't have that sort of sectarianism. You've got a vibrant community, Sunni Shias. You know, you've got Arab Syrians, you've got Iraqi Shias, you've got a variety, a melting pot of diversity in that city, Dearborn, and it's the place where Donald Trump went to in this campaign. Kamala Harris didn't go to Dearborn, but Donald Trump went and engaged the Muslim voters. And actually you see in places like that, Muslims turned to Donald Trump. And they turned to Donald Trump in huge numbers. I don't have the figures to hand, but they were huge figures. And that's never happened. Where Joe Biden was winning the Muslim vote in Dearborn, 90%, and this time Donald Trump was winning the vote by a comfortable majority. So people had bailed out on a political party because they saw what was happening in Gaza and American government, the Joe Biden administration's role in that they were giving weapons and giving them that political and diplomatic cover for Israel to carry out this campaign against Hamas and the Palestinians in the way that we saw. So Nadia Ahmed is in Orlando in Texas. Assalamu alaikum, Nadia.
Walaikum assalam. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. I mean, thank you so much for joining us, and apologies for the sort of delay in getting you on. I'm just trying to set the scene. What was the election like? So let's just go back. Joe Biden stands down. Kamala Harris is the candidate. The Democratic Party refused to have a Muslim Arabo-Palestinian speaker in the convention, on the convention floor. What are you thinking at that point about the choice? Because I know you're an active, or you were an active member of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think even before the convention started, what we wanted to do was to have an open primary and not just have Kamala Harris or Joe Biden be the anointed candidate, because there wasn't an open primaries in many states. For example, in Florida, we sued the Secretary of State along with the Florida Democratic Party to get other candidates on the ballot, and we were denied access. And so there was a sense of disenfranchisement going into the convention. The candidate, in terms of having Kamala Harris be the candidate, was decided by the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC. And since then, they've actually removed all of their videos from the DNC's YouTube page because they don't want everybody to know exactly what happened. So there was some bit of cover up with that. And then going into the convention, it was I think there was a clear demand to have a Palestinian speaker, and that was not made possible because the Democratic Party, the same way the State Department has been acting in bad faith.
Yeah, but practically it was impossible. You couldn't organize a primary in such a short period of time. It was, you know, it was given, it was less than 100 days, so it would be difficult to run that up because it starts in January, doesn't it, with the Iowa caucus, and it goes on all the way throughout the year to get to the Democratic Convention. But at that point, I remember you had a powerful speech by family members of hostages in Gaza, Israeli hostages. But then the Palestinian voices wanted a Palestinian voice, and that didn't happen. At that point, did you start to think about whether remaining in the Democratic Party, supporting the Democratic Party was appropriate?
I think, for example, for me, on the first day of the convention, I had held up with two other delegates a sign that said "Stop arming Israel," and I was physically attacked during the first day of the convention, and suffered a concussion as a result of that. And so for me, like, I knew at that moment that they weren't going to change their course of action. And the issue, I think, for me is whether or not the lesson that they learn is going to help them in 2026, or if it's something that would take a decade or longer for them to recover from.
Okay, Nadia, stay there. We need to take a very quick break. I know you're going to stay with us for the rest of the program, and we're going to reflect on this with more details as well, as people are reflecting on this second term of Donald Trump. So where did the Democrats get it wrong? How did the Democrats get it wrong? I mean, they spent over £1 billion, and yet they got decimated. And the sense of arrogance and entitlement is a debate for us to have. I'm sure we're going to explore that with Nadia. Join us on the other side of these short yet brief messages. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
The thing about a stroke is, the first sign might not seem like much. Like not being able to raise your arm. Or struggling to smile.
I can help, said a hippopotamus.
What are you talking, Bunny?
Or slurring when you speak. But any sign of a stroke is always an emergency. Face or arm or speech. At the first sign, it's time to call 999.
I'm Nadia Ali, and I have some important information for you. During winter, COVID-19 and flu spread easily and can cause serious illnesses. But flu and COVID-19 vaccines can make a big difference. They're safe and effective and play an important part in keeping you protected in the winter. So should you run into these viruses, you are likely to have milder symptoms and recover faster, cutting your risks of being hospitalized. Get vaccinated, get winter strong.
Amjad, now you ready for a good day?
He was a scientific hypothesis. She was a clinical study. And the future breakthrough that could cure her is closer than ever. With our research, we can keep saving lives like hers. Donate now to turn science fiction into reality.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Questions with me, your host Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, coming to you live from Wakefield. Now, the the weather's really bad out there. If you're in the north of the country, surrounding the country, so if you are driving, if you're traveling, be careful. Look after your neighbours, elderly neighbours. Check up on them because it's going to be a very difficult 24 hours with the snow. So please do drive carefully. I don't know how I got here, but I got here, and so I'm hoping that the sort of ride back is going to be better. Right. We're talking about Donald Trump, but we're also reflecting on Kamala Harris and the Democrats and the election result that everybody thought was going to happen. And Nadia Ahmed is here to reflect on this. Nadia, I mean, there was this perception that it was neck and neck and that the Democrats were just going to squeeze it. People were tired of Donald Trump. They knew what the Donald Trump playbook looked like. But when those initial results came in on Tuesday night, a couple of weeks ago, it was clear that she wasn't making the progress in some of those counties that she should have been making progress. She was down on Joe Biden's vote. Did you feel that she was going to lose it? What was your prediction before the election?
Before the election, as early as March, I had said that there would be an electoral wipeout. That the results would be similar to the results in 1968, which was the last time the DNC convention was held in Chicago. And at that time, this was the height of the Vietnam War. There was a lot of violence in the streets at the time in Chicago because of the anti-war protesters. And it led to the victory for the Republican candidate, Richard Nixon, at the time. And then he was in office for 2 more terms before Jimmy Carter came to the White House. And so it took them about 8 years to recover from that. And then they had another 8 years of the Republican with Ronald Reagan. So I felt that what happened in 1968 would be the same result we would see with this election. And at that time, the electoral votes were pretty much similar. There was about 300 electoral votes that Donald Trump had secured, and so it wasn't even close.
I mean, I do a lot of media here in the UK. I do BBC at the weekends, and one of the things that I was reflecting on in the run-up to this campaign was that the Democrats were talking about what they thought voters wanted to hear, and the Republicans were more in tune with everyday issues, the economy, immigration, healthcare, than the Democrats assumed that just because they were talking about, I don't know, trans issues or, sort of things that you look to as a political party rather than voters. It was at that moment I thought that Donald Trump is going to win. And so I share your pessimism around that. I just want to reflect on, was Kamala Harris the problem? Joe Biden? Do you think another candidate, I don't know, Bernie Sanders, AOC, some of the other candidates that might come along would be different? Josh Shapiro, Gavin Newsom. There are quite a few different other people in Democrats. Was it the Democrat Party, or was it just Kamala Harris and Joe Biden?
I don't think it was just Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I think it was a systems-wide failure for the Democrats, because it wasn't as if they just lost the White House; they also lost the Senate and the House. So what they were selling wasn't working. I mean, I would tell them I can't really sell genocide. It's not something that people are going to buy and vote for. And they have the assumption that every vote has to be earned. And if you go back and look, Kamala Harris was really scolding protesters when she went to go speak to them when she went to go speak at rallies in Michigan, whereas Donald Trump's campaign was actively courting the Muslim vote. He even had a rally towards the end of the election back in October where he brought Muslims on stage and even had Yemeni American imam as well as other leaders within the community. And he was basically, that was like the front page story that, Donald Trump is getting the Muslim vote. He didn't actually earn the Muslim vote in Michigan because a lot of it went to third-party candidates, but it was really about the way it looked, the optics of it. And so the fact that he brought them on stage, was standing with them, and working with them, I think is important to recognize.
Do you think sorry, I'm just going to say, do you think by doing that he kind of give the vibe, which is it's okay to vote for Trump. It's okay to be against the Muslim ban. It's okay to be against Islamophobia and racism and you know, sort of the causing up to dictators and you know, that sort of thing. But you know what? You want to punish the Democrats. The only way you can do that is to vote for Donald Trump, and it kind of makes it more acceptable.
Yes, but I think for Muslims, the situation was really lose-lose. It's not as if you were voting for a pro-Zionist candidate versus an anti-Zionist candidate. And so from that situation, Donald Trump was his administration brought the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords have really been a complete failure because they have failed to include free, prior, and informed consent of one of the parties to the agreement, which is the Palestinian people. And so we expect that things will get far worse in Palestine than they will get better. And just as you were speaking earlier in your show, that the level of violence that has been occurring is essentially normalized. And even if there's a bombing in a hospital or a school, it's not covered in the same way now as it was earlier within the genocide.
Yeah, I mean, that really pains me, having been to these communities and visited Gaza twice, to know that you bomb a school, it's become normalized, we've become desensitized. But that's a really interesting point that you make about it being about just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We didn't talk about Jill Stein, who was the Green Party candidate, the third party candidate. She did relatively well in these Muslim communities like Dearborn and sort of Detroit and Michigan, and I think it was the other place. But actually Muslim voters, you know, I don't know, activists like you would be telling them he's an Islamophobe, he's racist, he's fascist, he's a Nazi, I don't know what other terms you want to use. Don't vote for him, he's an enemy of Islam and Muslims. But this time Muslims were openly voting for him. But yeah, like you said, his record of the Abrahamic Accords, but he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You know, he's supported Israeli settlements or turned a blind eye to them. And he's appointed the most pro-Israeli cabinet in the history of the United States.
I'm not sure if it would be as pro-Israeli, like in totality. For example, Matt Gaetz, who's the appointee for an attorney general, he's been fairly consistent in having anti-war sentiments and not funding military aggression overseas or really funding overseas wars. And also Tulsi Gabbard, who is the appointee for or the nominee for the Director of Intelligence. She's actually a former Democratic congressman, even though she's a military veteran. And so she's also been recognized for her opposition to U.S. military interventions over abroad, has also advocated to stop these wars that advocate for regime change. But the nominee for Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is the senator from the state of Florida, has a very strong pro-Israel stance. And so this decision should also raise a lot of red flags for Muslim, and I think it's important. Muslims, I think it's important for them to really come out in terms of really advocating for candidates and nominees who support our views.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I mean, you're from Florida. I'm sure you know of Marco Rubio. You know, we look at some of the other appointments that have been made. But as I said, I think it's the most pro-Israeli likely cabinet in the history of the United States, even though the sort of US is one of Israel's most important allies. I mean, how have the Democrats taken, because I know you've been active in the Democratic Party, how have the Democrats taken this defeat? And is there some backlash against Muslim voters?
I haven't seen backlash per se against Muslim voters, but I have seen vote shaming or vote blaming, and generally that, you know, that, but I think that the problem was larger than the Muslim vote because the Muslim vote is only 1.1 to 1.4% of the overall vote. And even the votes that were given to Jill Stein may have been only half of the votes from the Muslim vote. So it really wasn't even cutting 1%. I mean, if you look across the map, the electoral map, county by county, the Democrats lost by large margins. And so it's not as if they can really blame Muslims. They have to look more broadly at all different demographics, and that what the Democrats were selling, people just were not buying it.
Yeah, it's that sort of retail politics, isn't it? If you're not talking about what the voters, what you think the voters want to talk about, and rather than talking to the voters and listening to them, and I think the sort of it was the economy, wasn't it? I think Ronald Reagan said it, didn't he? Are you better off 4 years ago than you are you better now than you were 4 years ago? And it was similar from Donald Trump. We're going to look in terms of forward to what we can expect from a Donald Trump term 2, his second term in office, and what's the future for the MAGA movement and the Republican parties after the break. But I just wanted to say, what's the future? Because you would have seen the counties that you referred to. The Kamala Harris vote, the Democrat vote, went down massively in so many different counties that you can't blame one particular community or one group of people. What impact do you think this is going to have on the Democrats and the direction the Democrats go next?
What I've seen with the Democrats is that they have not had a clear shift in terms of recognizing that the policies that led to this failure have actually something they need to change, because the party is more concerned in trying to maintain control than creating lasting change. And you can even see this by the names that are being floated for replacements for the DNC chair. That includes Rahm Emanuel, who was an appointee within the Obama administration. And we don't see a big change. We also saw President Bill Clinton going to Michigan and then scolding Muslim voters as well. So all of those are signs that they haven't really gotten the memo yet. And also, I think that where there could be change that is happening is the climate crisis, which has actually fueled quite a high bit of mass migration. And also one of the concerns that you will also see within the concerns that are happening from the genocide in Gaza is the concern of the closed borders, that people are not being allowed to leave, and that we're essentially starting to see a wide range of ethnic cleansing that is happening. People are essentially dying from starvation because they haven't been able to die fast enough from the bombs that have been paid for by U.S. tax dollars. And this is what's, I think, really disheartening and should really be a cause for outrage. And I think that's why we cannot give up on this fight.
Okay, Nadia, we've got one very final break, and then inshallah we're going to come back and we're going to talk very much about the Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump. We should be talking about his title, because that's his title in the transition to one president to another president. Anyway, we'll talk about what does the next 4 years bring, not just for the United States, but for the international community. We'll reflect with Nadia Ahmed very shortly.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising.
If we're not vaccinated,
We're not protected.
and could get seriously ill. Risk of lifelong disabilities.
Are your child's vaccines up to date?
The thing about a stroke is, the first sign might not seem like much. Like not being able to raise your arm. Or struggling to smile.
I can help, said little hippopotamus.
What are you talking, Bunny?
Or slurring when you speak. But any sign of a stroke is always an emergency. Face or arm or speech. At the first sign, it's time to call 999.
Hi, Naseem Shah here. Flu and COVID-19 spread more easily in winter and can cause you serious illness. But flu and COVID-19 vaccine can make a big difference. They are safe and effective and play an important part in keeping you protected in the winter. So should you run into these viruses, you are likely to have milder symptoms and recover faster, cutting your risk of being hospitalized. Get vaccinated. Get winter strong.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, often you reflect on a program when it starts and you think, I've got a long hour here, but you get a great guest who knows their brief, and you get a great presenter who's able to keep the show on the road. And let's not forget the producers and the people behind the camera. You don't ever get to see them. I sadly get to see them on a daily basis. I'm joking. Anyway, so beautiful people behind the scenes as well who put this program together, so I'm very, very grateful to them. They know who they are. Yes. So they've just reminded me, I've got my coat in the room next door to the studio, and so I need to be extra nice to them, but they're amazing. I love them very, very much. I love them so much, I'm still here 4 years later. I'm in my fifth year here on British Muslim TV, so either I'm doing something right or they are not doing anything right. Anyway, we're going to move on quickly because we've got very little time, and I just wanted to kind of reflect with Nadia Ahmed from Texas, from Orlando in Texas around. Nadia, just before the break, we were reflecting on the sort of Democrats and the future the Democrats have. Do they continue to go down the path of Gavin Newsom, you know, sort of liberal saviours, or do they go and actually think about talking to voters and get somebody from the grassroots, but something like Bernie Sanders or AOC or something like that? Anyway, I want to talk to you about Donald Trump. He's assembling his government. He's going to come into office on January the 20th when he's sworn in as president. How are you seeing Donald Trump Mark II?
So I think the second administration of Donald Trump, you can look at the response from world leaders after his election, especially in Europe. Leaders were really quick to congratulate him on his win, but privately as well as privately as well as in their own forums, they have had cause for alarm, especially in terms of thinking that whether we should be strategically patient with Donald Trump, or really try to analyze their own needs as well as particularly their defense needs, because Donald Trump has said that he is hesitant to fund NATO unconditionally. On the flip side, within the Middle Eastern countries, we've seen, we know very clearly, especially within Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Turkey, and other countries, they were favorable towards Donald Trump and preferred his rule. And so I think that there would be a desire to engage further with Donald Trump. But I think this is also something that has to be taken cautiously, because these are all the countries that are in a position to make a change and really leverage their position for Palestine, and they have really failed to do so, not just over the past year, but for a number of decades. And then within the American Muslim community, I think you're also going to see some shifts as well in terms of more gravitation towards the conservative position, which really focuses on family values, which has some resonance within the American Muslim electorate. But at the same time, when you have appointments such as Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, and you have Mike Huckabee as nominated as the ambassador to Israel, these also raise some concerns about the administration's stance on the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, that's really important, and we are getting loads of questions in as well, so please do, if you want to ask a question, please do post on social media as well, and that will be certainly important. I mean, there's a question from Asif Mahmood who says, how do the Democrats regroup and prepare to win the next election? Do they need to address the structural issues and provide policies which will make a positive and progressive change for most Americans?
The Democratic Party was able to win in 2020 because it was able to build strong coalitions. In this election, that there was a systems collapse on the coalitions front because organizationally the Democrats had a shorter window to develop Kamala Harris as a candidate. But even before that time, there was an article in the Washington Post that had indicated that the work of coalitions is really far behind, and this is really granular work, and that has to happen organically, and it wasn't happening because the campaign was in crisis management mode for quite a bit of time in terms of trying to have this facade that everything is going well. One of the things we had noticed is when the college encampments were up in the protest for Gaza, there was actually a decrease in support from Joe Biden in the polls each time there was more emphasis on these protests. And the one network that was always covering these protests was Fox News, to really show that Biden doesn't have control and is not really in favor of law and order. And so, as a response to that, you saw this heavy clampdown from state and local police to really stop the encampments, which were essentially very, very peaceful. And so that's something I think that we're going to see some backlash during the Trump administration, and that may be an opportunity for the Democrats to rebuild their coalition, but only time will tell.
That's really interesting. And then we have the thing, Project 2025, without getting our international viewers totally confused about what that is. It was a project of what would a second term for Donald Trump look like in terms of delivery on various. Do you think that project is connected to Donald Trump, and do you think we'll see a flavor of some of the crazy things in that in his second term?
For example, the Heritage Foundation, which has some ties to this, to people within this Project 2025, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. One of the things to also recognize is that the Republicans have dissent even within their ranks. For example, the other U.S. Senator from Florida, Rick Scott, had put forward his name, and he was recognized to be Trump's favorite to be the majority leader of the Senate, and he didn't make it even through the first round. And even the nomination of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General is receiving some pushback as well, because he was involved in some different types of illicit activity involving a minor. So even within the ranks, there's quite a bit of discord and lack of cohesion. So I think that also creates an opportunity for them not to be able to fully have Project 2025 play out, because they actually have to be organized to be able to do that.
So the Democrats described him as a fascist, as a racist, an Islamophobe, a Nazi, the biggest threat to American democracy, since since the last 30, 40 years. How do you see that strategy's clearly failed, but do you think Donald Trump is any of those things, or is it just Democrats' wishful thinking?
I think one thing to recognize is also the capacity of people to change. And so Donald Trump's second term is a lot stronger than his first term, whereas he has a clear mandate going into the White House in terms of the wide margin that he had won by. What also is important to recognize is that he has the experience now, serving 4 years in the White House previously, as well as 4 years reflecting on not being in the White House. So all that time he has had to really develop an agenda. And so you saw this time after he had won, he came forward with a clear list of nominees. And I think that they didn't always line up with the rank and file within the Republican Party. And so that's what I think will be interesting to see. Even there was a big ploy to remove Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader or Senate Minority Leader when during the Biden administration, and that was clearly something that was orchestrated by Donald Trump. And at the same time, there was another ouster of the Senate or the House Minority Leader. And so you also saw Mike Johnson emerging as a result of that. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how these moves are going to happen. I don't see clearly that the Republicans are going to do whatever Donald Trump wants, because even among them, they have concerns. So I think it'll be interesting to see what develops.
Yeah, we're coming towards the end of our time together, and I just wanted to kind of do some final closure reflections. The Democrats were reeling on election night. They thought they had it in the bag. They thought we're just going to, keep it. The Republicans were confident of winning, but weren't always certain. What does the future hold for American democracy?
One of the things that this election was about empire, and having Donald Trump win is a sense of bringing about a dismantling or collapse of that empire, because when the U.S. is weak, it allows for other countries to become stronger, including the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Korea, and South Africa. These countries are also going to rise more because a lot of trade restrictions. That's one of the hallmarks of a Trump administration is tariffs and trade wars. And so that's something that if he doesn't have a clear handle on, it will decrease the U.S. dominance on a number of areas, and particularly it could lead to further economic decline. And even though a lot of discussion on this election was related to the economy, it was really the economy because they've been spending hundreds of billions of dollars on war. The U.S. spends $1 trillion on war each year as its defense expenditures. And when it's spending that much money, it's not able to spend that type of money on its own population. So that's going to be another thing that we're going to see, is that when you have escalating conflict and wars and the lack of globalization, it'll lead to a decline of the United States.
Well, Nadia Ahmed, thank you so much for being my guest tonight. We thank you. We wish you well. May Allah give you health and continued success and protect you and your community in the United States. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. That was Nadia Ahmed, professor and activist, joining us from Orlando in the United States, in the state of Texas. What an extraordinary election it has been. We're going to pause our coverage, if you like, of this election campaign 2024. We'll come back to it, obviously, as we get closer to today that Donald Trump becomes president for the second time on January the 20th. 2025. So in less than 9 weeks' time, he will stand at US Congress and take the oath of office and become the 47th president. I had to think for that one, what it was, his 47th president. And we'll cover that closer time. And we're going to keep a close eye on the policy changes that are going to happen both internationally but also domestically as well. I want to thank the team behind the camera for putting us on this week, and to all of you watching this around the world, whether you're watching on satellite, whether you're watching us on the various social media platforms around the world. We thank you for joining us. If you're in the UK and it's snowing, please look after yourself, drive carefully, keep safe. From me, Mohammed Shafiq, and the whole team here at British Muslim TV, have a fantastic week for the rest of the week, and inshallah I'll see you same time next week. I'm always on air at 9 p.m. every Mondays, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. From me, Mohammed Shafiq, and the whole team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising.
If we're not vaccinated,
We're not protected.
and could get seriously ill, risking lifelong disabilities. Are your child's vaccines up to date?
I'm Nadia Ali, and I have some important information for you. During winter, COVID-19